and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Ask an Alchemist. Since I started doing work with the Eye of Horus videos back when the Gods of Egypt movie first came out, I've had on and off some emails regarding whether or not I actually believe that there might be an incarnation of Horus, or a physical, in other words, that an actual entity of supernatural composition would incarnate as a savior figure or otherwise in this our modern age. For myself, as an alchemist, as an alchemist, I do not believe in supernatural entities, meaning that, as Dr. Manhattan puts it so well,
by their definition are meaningless.
Oh, God, John!
Only what can happen does
Just
happen.
stop! You're bullshit!
only what can happen will happen. So a supernatural being, by definition, is something which exceeds the bounds of nature. And for me, I see it's all part of the same thing. So keeping that in mind, and also recognizing, and I've made a great effort to point this out, that from the standpoint of alchemy, as a language, as a science, and as an art, when I look at the mythological constructs, I'm looking at them specifically as representative of a cosmological interaction. That when I see these heroes or gods interact with one another, that this is a description of our prehistory, a description of how the planets interacted one with another, and how we witnessed this. Okay, so I don't necessarily ascribe to anything that would involve people throwing thunderbolts or being invulnerable or stuff. It's really fun to talk about that. And believe me, I love superheroes, and I love the comics, and I love mythology. But I kind of lump them all together in that same category. In fact, this is part of the method behind what I'm trying to achieve with the Esoteric Smackdown superhero series, is to demonstrate this transitive property. That as certain characters exhibit traits which are representative of a certain deity, we know that deity is actually representative of a certain planet or cosmological function, and therefore you should be able to determine then who the nature of the character is, but also subsequently the nature of that god or personage or what have you. So no, I don't believe in any, that there ever were Egyptian gods or Greek gods or Assyrian gods. I believe that the description of these gods is a description of planetary bodies that then are brought into terms which we can then understand for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that we can discern that things which happen above on the grander scope reflect things that actually happen here, and that our emotional state, our state of intelligence, all of this is scalable. And so that brings me then to this fine line that I tread as an alchemist, which when you recognize what it is, you'll see it's not actually that fine at all. But the line is this, that while I do not ascribe to any beings that are supernatural, I, as many other esotericists before me, do ascribe to the existence of beings of greater consciousness. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, in the same way that my dog, for instance, is representative of a conscious state. One moment. Okay. So this here is my dog Rudy, and we've known each other for a long time. We're best friends. I've known him since he first came out. I was there. I caught him when he was a pup. Caught him as he came right out, and Rudy is definitely a being who experiences conscious states. like right now he's got a degree of anxiety because he doesn't like being in front of the camera. But we obviously have a relationship. Now, my conscious state exists on a level where I can imagine a great number of things and then communicate those imaginings to other people, and I can understand a great number of things, which my dog obviously could never understand. The vacuum cleaner is still a mystery to him, right? This is why we rule the planet, because we're not afraid of vacuum cleaners. No, I don't mean that. But the truth is that there are scalable levels of our intelligence. And that these scalable levels of intelligence are all around us. So I don't need to go anywhere and seek out something that exceeds any relevant human experience. In other words, like for me, it's definable if I can look around in the last couple thousand years and find a credible resource that says this sort of individual actually walked the earth and existed. Thus far, I have not ever found anything that would credibly say one way or the other. There's a vast amount of tradition on all levels and all scales, but if you look at that through the language and interpretation under alchemy, you can see that all of these messages are actually speaking towards the same series of events and the same outcome if you ascribe to a certain level or degree of consciousness and personal conduct. That certain degrees of personal conduct edify yourself and draw things to you, and other kinds of conduct don't. It's not rocket science, and you don't need to label it with any particular religion. It's just being a decent moral human being. And so with regard to that, again, the rules should be relatively simple. With regard then to beings of greater consciousness, it's a simple matter to realize that yes, there's obviously going to be some organism out there in the vast cosmos that will be dramatically more intelligent than myself as a human being. And that me as a human being, I could look upon whatever they accomplish, do, or engage in and go, wow, that's like magical. But the truth is that there's an explanation for this. There's always going to be an explanation for it. And it doesn't need to necessarily be mystical. The beauty of the mystical is that some things, the explanation leads you into an area where you're like, whoa,
Miracles. Events with astronomical odds of occurring, like oxygen turning into gold. I've longed to witness such an event, and yet I neglect that. Inhuman coupling. Millions upon millions of cells compete to create life for generation after generation until, finally, your mother loves a man. Edward Blake, the comedian, a man she has every reason to hate, and out of that contradiction against unfathomable odds, it's you. Only you. That emerged to distill so specific a form from all that chaos. It's like turning air into gold. A miracle.
And that's a good place to be. That place of discovery and wonder and openness. I find that when you confine the universe in human terms, you get human results. And if you allow the universe to be unrestrained in cosmic terms, your results will measure equally as great, right? You'll have these vast, infinite degrees of understanding, because you'll recognize, as I believe our ancestors did long ago, that with the universe being electric, being composed of thought, being an expression of consciousness from one level to another, and that each of us in one level or degree to another, we experience our consciousness and believe that we're individuals and that we're conducting ourselves purely on the basis of our own thought and rationale, ignoring the fact that a lot of stuff that we do is purely automatic, that we don't even think, we just do, because that's what we are. We're a living human being. We be, and so, and that being doesn't require a personage like Horus necessarily to exist, even if it was nice. Although, frankly, I'm glad that there aren't beings like that, just simply because life becomes much more complicated, really, when you consider Congress with beings of such as that, supernatural entities. So, I hope that kind of clarifies things. It's important to keep a distinction between what is fanciful and what is real. I have a vast openness in my mind for the potentiality of a being of vast, extraordinary mental capacity and power and ability. I just don't require them to become supernatural. I just need them to exist in the same universe that I do, with the same laws and functions. Which means, could they exist outside of human vision? Sure. Considering how limited human vision is, of course. Could they exist outside of human perception? Sure. Because we're so imperceptive of our environment, most things exist outside of our perception anyway. And again, you don't need to have someone be supernatural in order to accomplish this. They simply exist in a framework which exceeds our own level of physical interaction and comprehension. And there's a lot of stuff out there in the universe that does that. We perceive so very little. And so it's important that we don't muddy our perceptions up with fanciful thoughts of demons and angels and gods, when actually each of these incarnations are descriptive of a greater principle that should be understood, should be pursued, and should be studied fully and completely. Without that, you're just going to run yourself right into the ground. And I, having tread upon many of these paths, many of these paths, I assure you, if I'm popping signposts on the road and suggesting don't bother with that trip, take my advice. I'm only going to do it if it's really not worth going down that road, because it's fully unproductive. And I think that adherence to or worship of something which is created in the mind of the human being is ultimately a kind of narcissism, really. Because you're conducting yourself in a transactional relationship where you do all the talking. And I don't know, again, that seems like a dead end to me. So, I hope that clarifies things. Now, to marry this thought with another question, am I an atheist? The answer is no, not really. Because I recognize that I am a participant of something that is vastly greater than myself. But I also recognize that so are you, and so is my dog, and my snake, and my bird, and my family, and everyone around me, and the trees, and the bushes, and the bugs, and the bees, and everything. We all are participants. We are all expressions of that. And so to then step into the next question that relates to this, do I believe that certain things could be incarnated, like the reincarnation of certain beings or people? Sure, why not? The reincarnation is something that is widely held, and I personally see great value in understanding the principle of reincarnation. But you have to remember the old adage, the old parable about the alchemist and the phoenix. And when the apprentice comes to the alchemist as the phoenix is about to whoosh and disappear into ashes and then be reborn, as the apprentice watches that process and the alchemist looks at him, he winks and he says, "Now you realize it's not the same bird. I just teach it to be the same bird." And that's really what may in fact be our experience as well, that each incarnation is in itself unique, but in itself also reminiscent of previous experiences. So, with that said, I hope that that's helpful, and I hope that you understand that this view by no means depreciates the value of sacred writing or the pursuit and study of mythology. Rather, I believe that it elevates it into a light which pulls it away from petty human needs and allows it to be more descriptive of something that was experienced by our ancestors and something which we experience today when we embody these myths on a subjective level and look at what they mean. Should we become Horus, incarnate in the flesh? What would then be the nature of our congress and conduct with each other? All right, I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this has been Ask an Alchemist. Thank you again for an excellent question, and I'll be talking to you soon.